And action. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. Leticia had a question about eating breakfast. I don't remember how old you are, Leticia, but for the rest of my patients, eating breakfast, a lot of the information I'm going to give you is determined by what you're eating for breakfast. That's GI or glycemic index. But before we get into that, if this is the first time you're finding me and you like what you hear, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I do new videos. So, breakfast, should we have it? I thought I would show you this. This is what I used to eat for breakfast every day. This is from 2011, and it's my steak, egg, and cheese bagel. I would have this. Let's see if I can do this. Right here is the date. I don't know if you could see that. That's the date of the bagel. 2011, and it is now 2018. 7 years old, pretty decent. This is my 10 packs of sugar that I would eat or drink with my coffee to make the coffee palatable. So that was my breakfast. I thought it was invincible back then, and I would do that. And then at night I'd have a beer or two or three, and during the day I'd eat anything I wanted to. Usually we were getting drug reps to give us food, and usually the food would be just as bad as the steak, egg, and cheese bagel. And this is where the concept of glycemic index comes in, but we'll take it one step at a time. So, should you eat breakfast? It depends on timing. If you're starting with the standard American diet, which is usually about 3.5 meals a day, usually fast food injected there somewhere, and then some kind of processed food as far as a microwaved heat up and eat kind of thing, then yes, I would say you can't just go from 3.5 meals a day to 2 meals a day with a fasting and mostly protein or fat kind of, or vegetarian kind of practice. So I'd say first move into eating on a regular basis. The gut is important to give healthy nutrient to. Think of it this way. The gut has an ecosystem of microbiota, and it has many different bacteria that are housed in the gut. And if you have a healthy gut and have not used antibiotics in a long time, then cool, but that microbiota needs to be fed. I consider them fish in a fish tank, and you have to feed the fish in a fish tank fish food. So you have to eat the microbiota, those bacteria have to eat mostly fiber, and that's how they survive. So a plethora of different fibers will feed different species in your gut. If you're lacking fiber, like in a carnivore diet or in some keto practitioners, you might be running into trouble because they're going to have to eat something. And even though that paleo, keto, carnivore type of lifestyle seems to be working for a select few, or actually a bunch of folks, that you're ignoring the other things that are necessary in life. And most populations that have lived long and healthy up to 100 years of age usually throw in fiber of some sort. So I think plant-based, you have to throw in something. My keto guys that have dialed it in usually will rely on a nice plethora of different veggies. So even if it's like paleo AI, autoimmune, there's still vegetables that are involved. They just have to avoid grains and certain simple carbs. So that's where this comes in handy. This is nothing. I mean, there's meat in here in the form of a steak, I think. I'm not sure where they get the meat from, but the cheese and the bagel part are highly simple sugars. And we sometimes it's a misnomer, because sugars make up the macronutrients carbohydrates, but I think we use the term interchangeably too much. So the idea about the breakfast is important to consider, but it should be a healthy breakfast. And eventually, when you're used to eating 3 meals a day, low volume, being mindful about how much you eat and knowing when to push away from the table, then we can get into the content of the food. So timing is important. I would say breakfast is important, especially for a school-age student, college or high school. If you're not packing a lunch and you're going to buy a lunch, then you're really a prisoner to what they provide at the campus cafeteria. And most of the campus food is cheap and fast. Has to be fast made, fast processed. Usually it's going to be processed, and cheap because it has to be sustainable for the campus or the school. So that isn't necessarily the healthiest type of food. So chopping up vegetables takes time, and you just don't have that kind of the manpower in the school system. So eating out at fast food places instead of the cafeteria, if you're a senior or if you're in college, I think that's could be better. But again, fast food, even in places where you're going to restaurants, they have to go to the bottom line too, which is saving cash to produce the product of food and also being profitable. And I think you're asking for trouble. If you can pack your own lunch, great. If you can't pack your lunch and you're a prisoner to what the school has to offer, then that is when you have to really dive into eating a proper breakfast. So if you go with a proper breakfast, it has to be something other than simple sugars. Simple sugars or simple carbohydrates, essentially that's where the glycemic index comes in, and we're going to talk about that right now. Glycemic index is a measurement produced by the Canadian Dietetic Association, and it was a comparison of different foods, plant and animal, and the glycemic effect, or how much that food, a serving of that food, would cause the jump up in carbohydrates floating in the bloodstream after digestion. Now the standard is to compare to glucose. Glucose is the fuel source that we're used to, glucose glycogen, and when you have a food that you ingest, it has to go through the stomach. Once it gets into the stomach, it gets digested, pulverized, turned into liquid, and when it turns into liquid, it goes into the small intestine, and in the small intestine it gets absorbed. It gets absorbed into the bloodstream, and then it goes to the liver, and then it gets processed to different amino acids or building blocks for the rest of the cells to utilize as fuel or to build structure. So the problem is, if the food source that you're eating, carbohydrate, is simple, that means that it goes straight into the stomach, it is easily digested, and it easily allows everything of its carbohydrate content to be absorbed into the bloodstream almost immediately. I like to think about Red Bull or a piece of white bread. And if you get that content from your stomach into the bloodstream at high levels quickly, then the pancreas has to react to those high levels of carbohydrate. And it makes high levels of insulin to match the high levels of carbohydrate. And insulin is not necessarily, at high levels, isn't that healthy, because usually the insulin will cause you eventually in a couple hours to crash because it goes below normal, makes you hunt for food, and usually when your brain and when your brain's tired, when you're hungry, you'll hunt or be programmed to go for more simple carbs versus fats, proteins, fiber, healthy diet. So that's when the starvation mode kicks in and you have bad choices, and then you're guilty afterwards. So, and that's usually at lunchtime. And one of the biggest effects of taking in a high carbohydrate, all simple carbohydrates or simple sugars, is that you'll crash afterward. So I hate to be the teacher who has his class right after lunch because everybody's probably falling asleep. Same thing with the teacher on Monday morning after everybody's partied all weekend. So it's important too, if you're going to switch to mindful eating, to take your breakfast, but try to make it a high glycemic index. Try to avoid high glycemic index foods and make it a low glycemic index. Again, high glycemic index means that your blood system or your blood levels are very high very quickly. Low glycemic index foods are the ones that take a long time to process. For example, the easiest comparison is simple bread, which you can put in your mouth like a communion wafer and it digests immediately, versus the big crusty hard bread that's hard to put into a little package and it takes a long time to digest. Those kind of sugars, those kind of carbohydrates, which are called complex carbs, take a long time to digest, so they'll stay in the stomach longer, and when they stay in the stomach longer, only a little bit of carbohydrate is released into the bloodstream at a time, so that your pancreas says, okay, I can handle this. A little bit of sugar or a little bit of carbohydrate in the bloodstream, pancreas only makes a little bit of insulin. So that's less of an inflammatory hit because there's less insulin spikes. And sometimes you can talk about glycemic load, which I have done a video on glycemic load, when you take in a whole bunch of different glycemic index foods and you get the average, which is the load. That's the entire plate all meshed together. And there are things you can do with your diet if you are in control of your diet that will change the absorption, like adding in fiber or adding in more fat or eating a protein first. It decreases the insulin spike that happens, and that's a healthy, balanced diet. So if you're going to switch from standard American eating to mindful eating and paying attention to your diet, then I would say it's okay to take breakfast. But make your breakfast high protein, high fat, healthy foods, mostly whole food, plant-based if you can make it, and that would be the best option. Now, I exercise in the morning and I exercise fasting. So I don't like anything in my stomach. I just don't like the feeling of exercising with food in my stomach. Hydration's important, I think, but coffee and tea, I usually wait till after I'm done exercising. So in that case, but I'm different, I'm more advanced. So I guess this is where we talk about more advanced things. If you are already good with your nutrition practice and you want to fine tune it even further, as far as breakfast, if you're not caring about, if you can control what you eat for lunch, then you have a little bit of an opportunity to work on your breakfast. Again, I don't eat anything until about 9 o'clock, so I postpone my typical breakfast. And when I did eat breakfast, I would usually go for something high protein. I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to cook rice, scrambled eggs, and Spam, and then give a big glass of orange juice in the morning. I sometimes would take milk and put in the chocolate powder, and that's high carbohydrate, and it's all simple. Versus having like a paleo breakfast, where if you had the meat or leftovers from the dinner before and you eat them for breakfast, that again will be taken into your stomach will be stretched, you'll have a sense of satiety, but it'll take a long time to digest that, and you won't have that insulin crash by lunchtime. If you have a crash because of a high insulin spike for breakfast, you're going to be searching for something for lunchtime. You'll be starving by lunchtime. You'll have the bad decisions at lunch. You'll shoot for low glycemic or simple sugars, something fast, something that you'll probably have guilt with, and then you'll crash after that. So it sets you up for a bad cycle. So if you eat properly in the morning, then you can take your time with eating for lunch. Then you can have not so much volume. Then you can take your time with eating for dinner. It's a positive feedback loop for the rest of the day. If you eat bad for breakfast, then you're going to be hunting for bad food for lunch, and you're going to be guilty and or tired and eat bad food or alcohol for dinner. So you can see the positive effect of the content of the food. So timing is important. I think there's been enough studies with fasting diets that you can get by with a window of eating, and the 10-hour window and the 14 hours of fasting I think is reasonable. Most of the animal studies go through 10 or 12 hours of fasting and 10 or 12 hours of eating. But nothing worse than continuing to graze and eat all day into nighttime when you're about to fall asleep. That's not healthy. And it sets you up for eating a bad meal the next day for breakfast. So it is important about what you put in your mouth all day long. Breakfast seems to start things off. But even if you are in school, if you do fast, like the 10 hours I mentioned, I eat at 9 a.m. and I go till 7 p.m. and that's it. But I'm accommodated to that. It might take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you work out in the evening, but I always try to educate patients on finding the best way. And Leticia, hopefully this gives you a little bit of a guide as far as whether you can take breakfast or not, whether you need it. Now, if you're going to just cut out breakfast because it will decrease your total volume of calorie intake per day, that's good. I think most Americans with the standard American diet are taking way too much volume. So if you cut one meal out, that'd be good. But you're going to have to get used to that, because if your gut and your mind are used to getting that hit of standard carbohydrates, all simple, 3 to 4 times a day, and you take away one hit, your body's going to be really going through craving. You'll probably have a little bit of withdrawal. Some people call it a Herxheimer reaction when you're withdrawing from food. Again, having a coach for nutrition practice and nutrition designing would probably be helpful. If you can't afford that right now and it's not a high priority, then do the best you can with moving over to healthy eating. Sometimes if you have no choice but you have to eat on the run because you're working mom and you have kids to drop off and prep in the morning, It's unfortunate, but you have to design something for yourself. It's to survive that small window of a couple of years until your child gets into 8th grade and on. It would be a challenge. Just don't gain too much weight and don't get too unhealthy, because when it comes time to take care of your health, if you've got the typical multiple diseases of the 40-year-old, you're going to be asking for trouble, because what we'll have to do is give you a whole bunch of pills and medications to control the disease presentation, and then slowly reverse your weight and get you off the pills one at a time and take care of deficiencies. It's better to kind of get ahead of that. Take care of your family while you're in those years of working mom or working parent. Just don't accumulate too much damage. So breakfast is important, just like any other meal of the day. As far as its value for the developing brain, it is important to have proper eating. If you eat 3 meals a day, fine, but make them high value, nourishing and building blocks if you're an athlete or a non-athlete. If you want to try to skip a meal to decrease your total calorie intake per day, that'd be fine. Breakfast seems to be an easy way to do it, but just make sure that if you do skip that breakfast, that you're not hunting for lunch. And then when you do eat your lunch, it has to be healthy, nurturing, and whole food if you can. So it does take some prepping. I usually will say on Sunday afternoon at about 3 o'clock, I'll open the fridge, I'll look at the cupboard, see if I have all the ingredients for the next 5 days, go shopping, get the water refilled, and then I'm good for the week. If you don't have that practice, you should make it a practice. Just a little bit of prep time will get you prepared for the rest of the week, so you don't have to scramble at the last minute and make poor food choices. So Leticia, hope that's a good question. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea, a framework of what to do. Whatever you do, try to avoid this stuff, though it seems like it's cheaper, seems like in the short run it will help you, but short-term gain, long-term loss, you're going to be seeing me for multiple problems. I'd rather have you work ahead of time.